Chapter 31. Shi Feng walked over without hesitation. He quickly picked up the one-handed sword filled with killing intent. The crimson blade was one of the rarest drops within the hell mode of the Deathly Forest. It was also the best sword for a swordsman below level 6. Crimson blade, secret silver rank, one-handed sword. Level 3. Equipment requirement, strength 12. Attack power plus 21. Strength plus 5, agility plus 6, endurance plus 3. Durability 30/30. Its attack power alone could rival a level 5 two-handed bronze axe. With the 6 extra points in agility, it could increase the attack speed of a swordsman by quite a lot. The Crimson Blade was definitely a precious weapon for swordsmen. Unfortunately, Shi Feng could not equip it yet. His experience was currently at 69% of level 2. There was still quite an amount before he could reach level 3. Moreover, he wouldn't be able to equip it even if he had reached level 3. This was because swordsmen would only activate the dual-wielding talent after they reached level 5. At that time, Shi Feng would be able to wield 2 one-handed swords. By the time Shi Feng was level 5, he would be able to wield the Abyssal Blade on his main arm, and the Crimson Blade on his sub-arm. His attack power would be invincible amongst level 5 players. Shi Feng felt great just thinking about such a future. "Brother Feng, hurry up and pick up the equipment. I'm dying of anxiety here," Blackie urged. "That's right, party leader. You can't just enjoy it by yourself. At least let us have a look at what equipment dropped." The loot on the ground had nearly blinded everyone's eyes. The anxiety burning in their hearts had even caused them to forget their joy of reaching level 2. They all wished to take a look at the drops of the 2 Hell Mode bosses. As for rushing over to snatch the loot, there was nobody present who would do such a thing. Even if the items on the ground were valuable, they still wouldn't do it. If they had done such a thing, although they could feel great for the moment, they would instead regret their actions for the rest of their lives. This was because Shi Feng was the true treasure here. Even if Shi Feng wanted all of the equipment, there would not be a single person who would refuse him. After all, the only reason they could make it to this point was all because of Shi Feng. That was why everyone was just standing by the side, obediently watching instead of rushing up to fight for the loot. All right. No need to rush." Shi Feng smiled. He quickly began to collect the items on the ground. Shi Feng was very satisfied with everyone's performance. They were unlike the players Shi Feng would occasionally party up with in his previous life. When the boss died, those players would rush up in unison to snatch the equipment. They immediately disappeared once they took all the equipment, leaving Shi Feng enraged and speechless. The reason Shi Feng did not set the party so that only the leader could pick drops was to test everyone's intentions. It was better to discover those treacherous people early on. Now that nobody had rushed up to snatch the items, Shi Feng could be more at ease with them. In a short moment, Shi Feng had collected all the loot on the ground. There were a total of 19 pieces of equipment and 5 silver coins. Such a harvest could rival the assets of a large guild in its entirety. Arranging his bag, Shi Feng's lips curled up into a smile. He found a forging design. Garrison armor forging design. Able to create a piece of level 3 bronze-ranked chest armor after learning the design. Materials required: 20 copper ores, 5 bronze ores, 5 magic essences. This piece of equipment was a good item. As long as a party's MT equipped it, diving into the normal mode of the Deathly Forest would become much easier. Not only did it have high defense and strength, it also increased maximum HP by 200 points. It was an extremely important piece of equipment for any MT. In Shi Feng's previous life, when this equipment was released, every guild madly fought over it. They also ignored all costs to enter the Deathly Forest in order to obtain this forging design. When Blackie saw Shi Feng's excited smile, his heart became even more anxious. It was needless to say for the other people, if a person's sight could kill, Shi Feng probably would have died over hundreds or thousands of times by now.
The items are not bad.
Here, you guys have a look.
Shi Feng did not waste any more time. He immediately displayed the attributes of all the equipment. There were a total of 15 pieces of equipment.
Amongst them, there was only a single secret silver equipment, which was the Crimson Blade.
There were also 5 pieces of mysterious iron equipment and 9 pieces of bronze equipment. The bronze equipment dropped by the bosses of Hell Mode were all of the highest quality. The bronze equipment dropped by elites were far from comparable. Amongst all the equipment, after the Crimson Blade, the most valuable items were the pieces of mysterious iron equipment. Out of the 3 modes of the Deathly Forest, only Hell Mode dropped mysterious iron equipment, whereas normal and difficult only dropped bronze equipment. Blackie's luck had always been good. Amongst the 5 pieces of mysterious iron equipment, there were 2 pieces of the dark color set meant for Cursomancers. The dark color set was definitely the set equipment for Cursomancers below level 5. There were a total of 5 pieces in the dark color set: head, chest, legs, shoes, arm guards. This time around, the parts that dropped were the chest and shoes. These 2 items had placed a wide smile on Blackie's face.
Brother Feng, I really love coming down to hell.
Let's come here once every day.
That way, I can complete the dark color set, and if anyone dares look down upon us at that time, I'll blast him to pieces.
Blackie showed off the dark color set in his hands.
After wearing the dark color set, Blackie felt himself becoming closer to an expert. His magic attack was increased to 66. A single level 3 dark arrow could take away more than half the HP of a level 1 shield warrior. If he could complete the dark color set, then a single dark arrow could one-shot a shield warrior. He put on the suit of ash-gray fur robes, coupled with glistening pitch-black boots. Everyone could tell they were pieces of a set with just a glance.
The others drooled when they saw the black luster of the dark color set. Their hearts were filled with hatred and envy for Blackie. They had never imagined entering hell would be such a great experience. They truly hoped they could enter hell a few more times in the future.
The remaining 3 pieces of mysterious iron equipment were the set pieces for Guardian Knight, Shield Warrior, and Elementalist.
Amongst those present, only Kola was a Guardian Knight.
Thus, Shi Feng gave the piece of equipment to Kola and stored the others. As for the remaining bronze equipment, Kola received a shield and Lonely Snow received a greatsword.
Both pieces of level 2 equipment had the best attributes possible on them.
Drowsy Sloth and Gluttonous Mouse also received a piece of bronze equipment each.
Quite a few pieces of Shi Feng's equipment were also replaced. Amongst the bronze equipment, there were 3 pieces that belonged to swordsmen. The 2 pieces of equipment that remained were stored away by Shi Feng. When everyone had changed their equipment, it was as if the entire party had a makeover. Every piece of their equipment was incomparably brilliant. Just a glance was enough to tell that they didn't just have common equipment. The entire party had also risen to level 2. Blackie's experience was even at 98% of level 2, just a tad bit short of level 3. The other 4 items were a forging design, a potion recipe, a rare skill for Cursomancers, and a notebook. The rare skill for Cursomancers overjoyed Blackie. It was an AoE skill called Hell Flame. Hell Flame deals 150% flame damage to an 8x8 yard area. Duration of 5 seconds. Cooldown 36 seconds. It was a godly skill for grinding monsters during the early periods of the game. What is this thing for? Shi Feng looked at the old notebook in his hand. He could not recall the hell mode of the Deathly Forest dropping such an item. Taking a look inside, Shi Feng discovered words which he could not understand. However, Shi Feng knew these words belonged to the ancient language of the elves. Within God's domain, any items which had a relationship with the elven language were definitely not common items. Just like the Ring of Gravity, there was a string of elvish words carved onto it.
They had allowed the ring to possess unimaginable powers. It seems I have to make a trip to the library.
Xi Feng felt this notebook was not as simple as it seemed. In his previous life, he entered the hell mode of the deathly forest tens of times. However, he had never seen such an item drop before. There was no such news from the other teams in the guild as well.
The likelihood of the notebook dropping only on the first kill was high. If Xi Feng wanted to make heads with the situation, he had to translate its contents at the library. "Brother Feng, what are we going to do afterward? Grinding mobs?"
Blackie was eager to try out the new skill he learned.
"That's fine as well.
We'll grind and do quests in Dark Moon Valley. The monsters there drop quite a lot of ore," Xi Feng said after some thought. With the forging design in hand, all that was left was to obtain the materials. However, Xi Feng needed a lot of materials. Now that Blackie had Hell Flame,
it should be a lot quicker to kill kobolds and gnomes.
Furthermore, Xi Feng knew of a few good locations where it would be suitable to use Hell Flame.
Xi Feng turned to look at the others, saying, "Will you guys follow us or do quests on your own?" "Big Brother Feng, how could you leave me out of grinding mobs?"
"I've already planned to follow Big Brother Feng in the future." Kola smiled like a fool as he gently caressed his new shield.
"Big Brother Feng, can we join as well?" Drowsy Sloth and Gluttonous Mouse were both high schoolers.
Currently, they had their heads lowered in embarrassment.
However, they did not wish to give up such a chance.
Xi Feng was a great expert.
They would reap endless benefits if they could learn a thing or two by staying by his side.
Xi Feng said, smiling, "Of course you are all welcome to join."
Suddenly, the two of them revealed excited expressions, both their hands clenched up in excitement.
"Since nobody is opposed to it,
then we will go grind in Dark Moon Valley." After finishing his piece, Xi Feng called out the system panel. He selected the dungeon's party teleportation, parting with the Deathly Forest.
Chapter 32. There was a sea of players in front of the Deathly Forest.
Currently, they were all gathered around the dungeon's entrance. Such a situation was due to the actions of the large guilds of Red Leaf Town. The elite teams of these large guilds had all arrived at the Deathly Forest.
They were all prepared to challenge the dungeon. These teams were much stronger than the loosely made elite parties. Common equipment covered their entire bodies. There were even pieces of bronze equipment in the mix.
That's Heaven's Crown's core MT, Immovable Mountain.
Never have I imagined that even he would come to this place. Someone will surely clear the Deathly Forest this time.
HMPH, Heaven's Crown is just a third-rate guild.
Look over there. Even the sub-leader of Assassin's Alliance, Stabbing Heart, is here.
Also, the Guardian Knight named War Soul by his side is the top 5 knight of the Assassin's Alliance.
He is even stronger than the Immovable Mountain. The players in the surrounding area started a discussion amongst themselves.
They held optimistic views towards these large guilds at clearing the Deathly Forest.
It was to be expected, as there were over 10 guilds currently present, both large and small. Amongst these guilds, the most well-known guild would be the second-rate guild, Assassin's Alliance. Following them would be the third-rate guild, Heaven's Crown. The others were just some unknown guilds, but they still would not be looked down on. This was because a workshop stood behind every guild. These workshops hired experts.
Average players could not compare to them.
Each large guild wanted to build its reputation in Red Leaf Town. Conquering the first dungeon in Red Leaf Town was the perfect way to do so. Hence, all of the large guilds made ample preparations for the dungeon. They spent large sums of their assets to buy equipment and medicine. They also bought a lot of information on the Deathly Forest. So, they were extremely confident about conquering the dungeon.
Boss waving. These guild teams have gorgeous equipment. They will definitely clear the Deathly Forest this time, Wordless Summer Night commented with a pained expression. Waving slowly but surely crossed his arms in front of his chest. He nodded slightly, saying in a helpless tone, The deathly forest is too difficult.
We party wiped before we even met the boss.
In the end, parties like ours only became scouts for the guilds.
What's there to brag about being a guild's expert? Boss, it's not our skills that are lacking. The dungeon is just too horrifying.
It has too high of an equipment quality requirement. The shield warrior, battle to the end, said in disdain. He held contempt for the guild experts deep in his heart, and he was sure only their equipment prevented them from clearing the dungeon.
That's right, boss. If our party had such equipment, we would have long since cleared the deathly forest, Wordless Summer Knight confidently said. Speaking of dungeons, Wordless Summer thought of Shi Feng's party. He giggled as he said, "It's not like we didn't have any gain. We've killed 2 night rabbits and even got a skill book for berserkers.
Compared to that party led by Captain Noob, we're much stronger. They still haven't shown themselves.
I guess they've already fled from embarrassment. It sure is a pity for Lonely Snow.
If he followed the boss, then he would have been given this skill book. If he found out about it, he would regret not following us into the dungeon."
That's right. Lonely Snow doesn't know how to appreciate the kindness given to him.
Now, he will definitely regret not following the boss, Battle to the End laughingly said.
Lonely Snow's skills are still quite good. I don't know how that noob managed to gain the favor of that expert called Blackie.
However, no matter how great that expert's techniques are, with dead weight pulling him back they would still party wipe.
He is probably too ashamed to show himself right now.
If he had gone with us, we might have cleared the deathly forest by now. Waving slowly was silently pleased with Blackie's end. Boss, the guilds are going to enter now, Wordless Summer said. However, just as the guilds were about to enter the deathly forest, the dungeon's teleportation gate suddenly changed color.
It instantly turned from a silvery gray to a pitch black color. There was also an indistinct skull that was roaring. The many members of the guilds couldn't help but retreat a few steps back. What is this situation? Such a question appeared within everyone's hearts. However, they quickly received their answer. 6 figures suddenly appeared in front of the dungeon's entrance.
Each and every one of them was clothed in glorious garments. Just by standing there, the 6 of them caused others to feel a faint pressure, especially the Cursomancer with the black-colored staff.
The dark gray-colored equipment on the Cursomancer was clearly a set. A single glance was enough to tell they were not common goods. The materials it was made of were much better than bronze equipment.
Why are there so many people?
Shi Feng took a look at his surroundings, discovering these people were the elite teams of large guilds. He was slightly confused as to why all these people were blocking the dungeon's entrance.
Shi Feng's party members also started to panic.
The pressure from being watched by so many people was no weaker than facing off against a boss monster. Boss waving, look.
Isn't that the noob?
Wordless Summer pointed towards Shi Feng.
Waving slowly knitted his brows.
Shi Feng was not the only person he spotted. There was also Lonely Snow. He curiously asked, how could they be here?
Didn't they run away long ago?
In my view, I think they did not even enter the forest of the dungeon.
They knew they could not clear the dungeon, but they were also afraid of embarrassing themselves.
So, they stayed in there until now.
Battle to the End laughed, but now they just happened to get caught after leaving the dungeon.
Just look at how ugly Lonely Snow's expression is. Ha ha ha!
As expected of a noob, he doesn't even have the courage to enter the dungeon.
Waving slowly but surely felt Wordless Summer Knight's words made sense. If not,
how could Shi Feng's party have returned safely?
Waving slowly and the other party members experienced the horrendousness of the deathly forest.
After entering the forest of the dungeon, there were only 2 possible results. Either they cleared the dungeon, or they party wiped. There was no possibility of a third option. Now that Shi Feng's party had returned safely, there was only one possibility. They never entered the forest. It was impossible that they cleared the deathly forest. During the time Waving Slowly and company started laughing at Xi Feng's party, the players surrounding Xi Feng had already laughed themselves into madness. Such a scene confused Waving Slowly and party. Why were these people laughing at Xi Feng's party?
Were they actually famous?
What Waving Slowly's party did not know was that Xi Feng's party had already become famous throughout the entire Deathly Forest. Xi Feng's party mainly consisted of level 1 noobs, yet they entered the hell mode of the dungeon.
There was no action more foolish than this. It would be hard for others not to notice such an action.
As they say, bad news has wings.
Ha ha ha, that exotic player is back.
I actually admired him for entering the hell mode of the Deathly Forest, but he was just a coward.
I can't take it anymore. My stomach hurts too much from laughing.
The players surrounding Xi Feng's party understood their actions. They had foolishly entered the hell mode of the dungeon, so they could not enter deep into the dungeon. Instead, they stayed around the dungeon's entrance and looked for a time to leave the dungeon in secret.
Unfortunately, even God would not help them.
They coincidentally left just to be seen by the many guilds.
Brother Feng, what's wrong with these people? Blackie looked at the laughing players laying on the ground.
Scratching his head, he asked with an odd tone, "Did their brains go bad? Why are they holding their stomachs and laughing on the ground? Who knows?
Maybe their brains had a cramp.
It seems we shouldn't play God's domain too long, especially for the first time."
Xi Feng did not think their appearance had any relation to the actions of these people. We better leave.
This is just giving me the creeps.
The other members of the party nodded in agreement.
The players in the Deathly Forest were truly strange.
Big brother, please hold on for a moment.
Just as Xi Feng's party was about to leave the dungeon's entrance, a ringing voice entered everyone's ears. Taking a look at the voice's origin, a beautiful and pure maiden dressed in a pure white mage's robe was seen walking towards Xi Feng's party.
Xi Feng recognized this person. She was Star Moon Kingdom's top 100 cleric, Xuanhuan. Xuanhuan walked to Xi Feng with an embarrassed look, a blush appearing on her tender white cheeks. She whispered, "Nice to meet you. I am Xuanhuan of Ouroboros. We met before entering the dungeon. Our party's leader wishes to have a chat with you about the Deathly Forest's dungeon. I wonder if you would be interested in sharing?" Chapter 33.
Xuanhuan's appearance shocked everyone present. Every player present knew who Xuanhuan was. After all, she was the goddess partymate. Coupled with Xuanhuan's beauty and purity, she was firmly implanted in everyone's memories. However, why would such a pure maiden invite a noob? Furthermore, what was harder to imagine was, the person who invited the noob was not Xuanhuan, but the goddess, Gentle Snow. Who was Gentle Snow? She was the publicly acknowledged snow goddess in the virtual gaming world. There were countless Mr. Perfects who wanted to approach her. There was even a trust fund baby who had offered 10 million credits just to have a meal with Gentle Snow. However, that person did not even receive a word from her. Scram! That trust fund baby was naturally enraged. Thus, he sought to get revenge and turn Gentle Snow into his possession. Yet, a few days later, this trust fund baby was dumbfounded. His father, a self-made wealthy man, suddenly became a poor pauper. All of his father's properties had, within a night, become someone else's possession. When the trust fund baby's father found the cause, he nearly beat his son to death. From then onwards, everyone finally knew the dreadfulness of Gentle Snow. However, Gentle Snow's fans had further increased in number after this incident. Gentle Snow was like a true goddess from the legends, divine and inviolable. Such a goddess had actively invited such a noob. How could it not shock people? Currently, everyone was no longer in the mood for laughter. There was only envy and displeasure. What virtue and ability did a noob have to be invited to chat with the goddess? Damn, this noob must have some dog shit luck. Why him? I'm so handsome, yet the goddess won't even speak a word to me. Jade Windtree, am an expert in God's domain. But why won't the goddess come have a chat with me? Could it be that I am too handsome?
Or does the goddess prefer a wilder type? The goddess must want to understand the situation inside the Hell Mode dungeon.
That's why she looked for him.
I never imagined even noobs would have such benefits. If I had known earlier, I would have also entered Hell Mode once. Everyone started their own discussions.
They glared at Shi Feng, having thoughts of disdain and envy towards him. They could not help but want to kill him right that instant. Boss waving slowly, I didn't hear wrong, right?
That noob actually received an invite from the goddess. I must have heard wrong. Wordless Summer Knight pinched his thick cheeks, saying with a foolish expression,
It should be right.
However, the goddess must have something she wishes to ask.
He was only lucky. That's all. The prideful waving slowly deemed Shi Feng being able to chat with the goddess was all just due to his luck. Battle to the End nodded his head to the side, agreeing to waving slowly but surely's opinion.
Gentle Snow was an existence they had looked up to. They were people of completely different worlds.
Not to mention having a chat with her, they had already felt incredibly lucky just by being in the deathly forest with Gentle Snow. Just when everyone thought Shi Feng would smugly agree to the invitation, Shi Feng had instead given a contradictory answer.
Not interested. I'm in a rush for time. Shi Feng turned around and left immediately after responding. He did not care about Xiao Yuer in front of him at all, and he cared even less about Gentle Snow's invitation.
Now that the forging design was in his hands, he only lacked ore.
The quicker the garrison armor made its appearance, the greater Shi Feng's income would be. If he missed out on this great chance, he would lose a large sum of coins.
Blackie had been extremely excited when he thought he would be able to get close to the goddess. Shi Feng's answer, however, nearly drove him to madness. There must be a mispositioned nerve inside Shi Feng's brain to reject the invitation.
It was not just Blackie who was dumbfounded. Even Xiao Yuer was shocked motionless. It was the first time she met a man who actually rejected Sister Snow's invitation.
Many men begged for such an invitation, yet all of them remained empty-handed. Could this man be a fool? Let's go. What are you daydreaming about?
He turned and asked his motionless party members when Shi Feng discovered nobody following him. Brother Feng, that's an invitation from the Snow Goddess.
Won't you think about it some more? Blackie requested.
His mind was bordering insanity right now.
At the same time, his heart continually prayed for Shi Feng to agree quickly. Such a great chance would be impossible to come by in the future. I've already said I don't have the time, Shi Feng responded with a smile.
Shi Feng became speechless when he looked at Blackie's prayerful eyes. No matter what, Blackie's reverence for the Snow Goddess would not change one little bit. Currently, Gentle Snow and Zhao Yueru walked over. Clad in a silvery white plate armor, Gentle Snow was undoubtedly the focus of the entire deathly forest. Everyone's eyes were glued to her perfectly curved body, their mouths drooling. Nobody had imagined Gentle Snow would personally make an appearance. Everyone's envy and hatred for Shi Feng grew even more. You can be at ease. I will not waste too much of your time. This piece of bronze equipment can be your compensation. Gentle Snow carefully watched Shi Feng. She discovered Shi Feng was indeed different from other people. Although Shi Feng had a typical appearance, his body gave off a calm and steady feeling. There was also a faint murderous aura radiating from his body. Such temperament could only be honed after experiencing countless life or death battles. Snow? Zhao Yueru was shocked. She never thought Gentle Snow would think so highly of Shi Feng. Her beautiful eyes unwillingly turned towards Shi Feng. Her brows slightly creased, and she said in a contemptible tone, I don't think this fellow is worth a piece of bronze equipment. A piece of gray equipment at best. They had already been respectful by inviting Shi Feng over for a chat. However, not only did Shi Feng not appreciate their kindness, he even rejected them immediately. If someone else received such an invite,
they would have long since come running over to fawn over them.
It was the first time Zhao Yueru met such an unattractive man who took such an action. She firmly believed Shi Feng had some scheme in his mind and there was nothing good about him. No need for the bronze equipment. I have those things, myself. Shi Feng waved his hand, saying in an uncaring tone.
He never tried to flatter the witch, to begin with, but he never imagined she would speak of him in such a way. However, he was not a poor ghost. He did not need any charity. Zhao Yuru's beautiful eyes measured up Shi Feng.
She couldn't help but let loose a faint laughter, playfully saying, "Such an unyielding spirit. You clearly want it, yet you're refusing to admit it."
Snow, this fellow is really insincere.
Yueru,
Gentle Snow impatiently sent Zhao Yueru a glance, hinting her not to overdo it.
To begin with, they were the ones who took the initiative to send the invite. It would not be proper to look down on others now. Zhao Yueru pouted. She shot a glance towards Shi Feng, puffing out her prideful twin peaks as she helplessly turned her head away. She did not think a poor fellow like Shi Feng would have anything they wanted.
Sorry, please receive this piece of equipment as an apology. Gentle Snow took out a level 0 bronze belt meant for a swordsman and traded it to Shi Feng.
She wanted to put an end to this matter.
Shi Feng did not reject the offer after seeing Gentle Snow's sincerity.
If he rejected it, it would only show how petty of a man he was.
At the same time, he would cause Gentle Snow to think he did not wish to reconcile.
He couldn't just keep on refusing the kindness of others. Besides, he was indeed missing a bronze belt.
Hee. And here I thought you had some great ability. In the end, you still need it, Zhao Yueru said in disdain.
She inwardly felt unfortunate to lose a piece of bronze equipment.
They obtained this piece of equipment after killing a rare elite with much difficulty.
It was an absolute waste now that their efforts were benefiting Shi Feng. Shi Feng slightly wrinkled his brows.
Not even a man would be able to stand being mocked and ridiculed in such a way, not to mention a reincarnated person like Shi Feng.
Since Miss Snow gave me a piece of bronze equipment, it is only proper for me to reciprocate in kind. Let this item be the return gift. Chapter 34.
Gentle Snow's eyes flashed when Shi Feng also wanted to gift her something. She felt astonished and thought Shi Feng was an interesting person.
Shi Feng conducted himself properly, and he was not as hard to get along with as she had imagined.
You? Gifting Snow a present?
Do you think Snow would even want it?
Zhao Yueru could not help but turn her head around.
Her fresh red lips curled into a seductive smile, and her eyes held a sneer within them. She was silently laughing at Shi Feng's overestimation of himself.
What kind of item has Gentle Snow not seen before?
Even luxury cars worth over 10 million could not catch her attention, not to mention an item within a game. Currently, Shi Feng took out a piece of paper from his bag. This drawing was one of the drops from the boss.
Shi Feng nonchalantly passed the item over to Gentle Snow. When Zhao Yueru saw Shi Feng take out a piece of scrap paper and give it as a present to Gentle Snow, she could not help but coldly say, "Are you trying to make a fool of us?" "No," Shi Feng said in a serious tone. "Snow gave you a piece of bronze equipment, yet what about you?"
You took out a piece of scrap paper to trick her. Do you think a piece of scrap paper could compare to a piece of bronze equipment?
If you're not playing us for fools, then what are you trying to do? Hearing Shi Feng's answer, Zhao Yueru was further enraged. Behind Shi Feng, Blackie and the others were each covered in a cold sweat. Even if you did not wish to chat with the goddess, you still should not make a fool of her.
Wasn't this just courting death?
They clearly obtained a good amount of equipment inside the dungeon, and just simply giving one of those pieces would easily solve the problem. If Shi Feng's actions angered the goddess, even if the goddess herself did not take action, the players surrounding them would surely kill them off for her. Seeing a mishap about to occur, Blackie thought of giving away the bronze staff he held. However, Gentle Snow gladly received the scrap paper Shi Feng gave her. Suddenly, Blackie and everyone else's mouths formed a 0H shape. The goddess accepted it? What kind of situation was this? Thank you for your present. I like it very much. Now, can we go somewhere with fewer people to have our chat? Gentle Snow smiled in appreciation.
Xi Feng also smiled and nodded in agreement. Looking at Gentle Snow's faint smile was like watching a dazzling sun that warmed a person's heart. It would be hard to forget such a smile, even after a lifetime.
Snow, you're going to forgive his rude actions just like that? Zhao Yueru asked in a puzzled tone.
It's all right, Yueru. I like this item very much. Gentle Snow turned around after commenting, letting Xi Feng lead the way. Zhao Yueru was stunned. She just could not understand what kind of drug Xi Feng had given Gentle Snow. Was a piece of scrap paper enough? Just what was this piece of scrap paper?
Snow,
just what did that fellow give you?
Zhao Yueru whispered. Just by seeing the fire poker on Xi Feng's waist, she could tell Xi Feng would not be able to give anything valuable. However, Gentle Snow still happily received it. Such a result puzzled Zhao Yueru significantly.
A potion recipe for the basic strength potion.
When consumed, it will increase a player's strength by 6 points for half an hour. Gentle Snow calmly replied. What? Zhao Yueru leapt up in shock. How could he have such a precious recipe?
Potion making was very hard to learn.
The recipes needed were famed for being rare drops. Even the current Ouroboros only had a few normal recipes, not to mention rare recipes.
A recipe that was capable of increasing the strength of a player by 6 points was unheard of until now.
If the current level 2 players could have an extra 6 points in strength, that would equate to an additional 12 attack power. Such a potion would have a significant effect when they dove into a dungeon. Regarding guilds who frequently conquered dungeons, the value of this recipe far surpassed that of tens of pieces of bronze equipment.
As long as the basic strength potion were for sale, the supply would never be able to meet the demand.
Yet, Xi Feng gifted such a recipe away. Did Xi Feng not know the value of this recipe? However, Zhao Yueru shook her head, denying this assumption. Before, she had seen the confident expression on Xi Feng's face. He knew the immense value it had towards their guild. Currently, Zhao Yueru turned her head once more towards Xi Feng. A tinge of red appeared on her cheeks when she thought back to what she said before.
She felt humiliated. She actually called a rare recipe a scrap paper.
When she thought of Xi Feng's smile, he was definitely laughing at her lack of knowledge.
He was such a hateful bastard. Now you finally know. I've already said he wasn't simple. Gentle Snow smiled at Zhao Yueru. Even after Gentle Snow and Xi Feng left the scene, the surrounding players had yet to recover themselves. What kind of situation was this? A noob actually received the attention of the goddess. Was this person really a noob? Boss waving slowly, that noob left with the goddess. Wordless Summer Night was very upset. After watching the goddess being very courteous with Xi Feng, even an idiot could tell Xi Feng was not that simple. Don't mind it. I've heard from others that the noob entered the hell mode of the Deathly Forest. The snow goddess must have intentionally invited him to learn about the difficulty of hell mode. Waving slowly did not believe that he would misjudge a person. Xi Feng was definitely a noob. He must have just been incredibly fortunate. Before, he managed to gain the favor of an expert. Now, he also somehow managed to obtain the favor of the goddess. In a rock pit over 200 yards south of the Deathly Forest, Gentle Snow and Xi Feng sat facing each other. Surrounding them was a beautiful scenery and gurgling streams. As for the others, they stood to the sides. None of them tried to eavesdrop on the conversation between Xi Feng and Gentle Snow. They comfortably sat down and started chatting amongst themselves. I wonder what business Miss Snow has for me? The Deathly Forest. Gentle Snow openly said, I want the strategy for the Deathly Forest. State your price. Hee hee. I'm afraid Miss Snow is overthinking things.
How could I have the strategy to the deathly forest?
I've only entered the dungeon once. Shi Feng would not admit to possessing the strategy. It would bring about the suspicion of others.
After all, God's domain was a game constructed by the main God system.
Even beta testers would not know a detailed strategy for the dungeon.
It was still possible to trick amateurs such as Blackie, but it was impossible to trick Gentle Snow.
Troubles would arise if Shi Feng were to generously share his strategy.
Gentle Snow smiled sweetly. Her eyes swept once across Shi Feng's party members before calmly saying, "If I'm not mistaken, the equipment your party members are wearing all came from the hell mode of the Deathly Forest. Although your party has 1 or 2 players with proper techniques, everyone knows you had invited 3 level 1 noobs as temporary members. Such a party was able to enter hell mode, and even came out with quite a lot of equipment. Do you think I would believe you if you said you did not have any information? Let's not twist our words around. I know you're a beta tester, and not just any beta tester.
You must have done detailed research on the Deathly Forest. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to clear the dungeon at all. This basic strength potion recipe is the best evidence as to why I would say you've cleared it. You can rest assured, however, that I will not reveal your secret."
Gentle Snow fixated her gaze on Shi Feng as if she saw through Shi Feng's entire being.
"All right, what you say is correct."
Shi Feng shrugged his shoulders, silently letting loose a breath.
He never thought Gentle Snow would fill up the questionable gaps. It would not be any better for Shi Feng if Gentle Snow thought in such a way. "State your price then." Gentle Snow was all smiles with Shi Feng. It was as though she was saying, "Did you think I could not control a person like you?"
This lady knows everything.
Chapter 35. Seeing Gentle Snow smile with confidence, Shi Feng was already snickering in silence. Sheep's wool comes from a sheep. If you wished to earn money, it was natural to obtain it from a wealthy person. A first-rate guild like Ouroboros was unquestionably an appropriate target. According to Shi Feng's knowledge, the guild, Ouroboros, had already conquered over 10 virtual reality games.
However, the appearance of God's domain had shaken the virtual gaming world. It was dubbed as mankind's second world. It caused the collapse of many other virtual reality games. Afterward, countless companies started madly investing in God's domain, nurturing their guild, growing their influence, and building their place in the virtual financial world.
Naturally, Ouroboros also invested in God's domain.
They, too, wanted to share a bite of the countless assets.
Also, Ouroboros was not just wealthy, it also had a great background.
The number of experts working under Ouroboros exceeded over 1,000. These 1,000 men were famed as the god-slaying army in God's domain. The existence of these 1,000 experts allowed Ouroboros to establish a large virtual empire. They unified over 80 cities in God's domain that each had a population of over 1 million players.
Ouroboros was a true tyrant in God's domain.
During Ouroboros' peak, it was the equivalent to the entire Star Moon Kingdom. As for Shadow, it had only established 10 cities that did not have populations exceeding 1 million players.
In such a way, Ouroboros had become a peerless tyrant in the real world.
Their position was truly unimaginable. It should be known that Star Moon Kingdom was a relatively large kingdom, even amongst the hundreds present in God's domain. It was at the upper middle ranks. One could clearly see Ouroboros' prowess when compared to it. How could Shi Feng not wish to work with such a powerful guild?
It was just the risk of working with Gentle Snow was too high.
Because of her particular identity, the information she could get a hold of was just too great.
Shi Feng could not help but be cautious of her. It was why he intentionally revealed some hints, especially with the recipe for the basic strength potion. He wanted to see Gentle Snow's reaction. If she behaved in a bad way, Shi Feng would naturally act ignorant and push all responsibility away.
However, the present situation was undoubtedly the one Shi Feng looked forward to the most. Since you've already explained, my asking price isn't high.
20 silver coins.
Xi Feng calmly stated.
To a small guild of current times, 20 silver coins would already be their entire fortune. Even a 100-man money farming group would need 2 to 3 days to collect such an amount.
Zhao Yueru sucked in a cold breath, nearly jumping up when she heard Xi Feng casually ask for 20 silver coins. She stared at Xi Feng, furiously saying, "Why don't you just rob someone?"
That would be a faster way. I would do it if I could get that much money,
Xi Feng said with a smile.
You should know there is a lot of skill books, weapons, and equipment for players inside the Deathly Forest. They can quickly increase the strength of players.
If you could conquer the Deathly Forest a step earlier, the benefits it would bring towards future developments go without saying. Can't you make it a little cheaper? 20 silvers? Even we, Ouroboros, can't simply take out that much money. Zhao Yueru thoroughly disliked Xi Feng now. However, when she thought about the importance of the Deathly Forest, she still used a softer tone to speak to Xi Feng.
Sorry, but no negotiations.
If you don't agree to it, then I can only consider working with some other guild. Xi Feng remained firm with his decision.
He had been very sincere in dealing with Gentle Snow. If it was still not possible, he could only consider the Assassin's Alliance.
The Assassin's Alliance was wealthy and imposing. Before, they spent over 20 silvers to buy Xi Feng's level 5 bronze shield.
I understand. 20 silvers then.
However, we need some time to collect the money. After all, our Ouroboros area of influence isn't in White River City, but at the capital, Star Moon City.
There are only a few Ouroboros members close to White River City.
Give me a day's time. Take these 7 silvers as a deposit.
I will compensate you with 15 silvers a day later.
Gentle Snow had never imagined Xi Feng's appetite would be so great.
20 silvers was still a lot to her.
However, the importance of clearing the Deathly Forest was too great.
They had to grasp it as soon as possible. At the same time, Gentle Snow knew that silver coins were precious during the early periods of the game.
Hence, she had given a little more to Xi Feng as interest.
Alright. Here's the map of the Deathly Forest, and also the things you need to pay attention to when fighting against the boss. Xi Feng also knew what Gentle Snow had said was true.
Wanting to gather 20 silver coins would not be easy.
Ouroboros did not have as great of influence in White River City as the Assassin's Alliance did. Xi Feng sent mail to Gentle Snow containing detailed introductions to the Deathly Forest. With Gentle Snow's abilities, they should be able to clear normal mode easily.
Gentle Snow looked at the strategy she received for the Deathly Forest. Her heart slightly shook only after a slight glance.
She never imagined the Deathly Forest would be so horrifying.
Just the number of paths available already numbered 36.
33 of them were dead ends. There was even a Night Ranger who moved based on opportunity. There was also a detailed description of the boss and when it would cast its skills.
She definitely got more than 20 silvers worth of information. If she sent others to explore the paths bit by bit, the cost would exceed 20 silvers. Suddenly, another change occurred to Gentle Snow's perception of Xi Feng.
She felt Xi Feng was not as simple as he seemed to be. He was certainly an expert. Only an expert could have such a profound understanding of the dungeon.
However, Gentle Snow had no recollection of an expert swordsman like Xi Feng.
In 3 days, Ouroboros is planning to enter the first level 5, 20-man dungeon, the Dark Moon Graveyard. I wonder if you will be interested in joining? Gentle Snow, beautiful eyes looked towards Xi Feng as she invited him to the team dungeon. She already acknowledged Xi Feng's strength. If Xi Feng was with them, entering the team dungeon, they might have an easier time in it. From a side, Blackie looked at Xi Feng with dumbstruck eyes. His admiration for Xi Feng had already reached the level of worship. He never imagined Xi Feng would be so awesome as to conquer the snow goddess in a few moves. The goddess even wished to invite him to raid a dungeon. How great of an honor was this? There were countless men who dreamt of raiding a dungeon with the snow goddess.
However, Zhao Yueru became irritated after hearing Gentle Snow invite him.
Shi Feng was but a beta tester.
At most, he had experienced God's domain a few more days than they did and had a deeper understanding of the Deathly Forest. However, the 20-man team dungeon had only opened after the game's official release.
It did not exist during the beta test, so there was no way for Shi Feng to know anything about it. Also, Shi Feng wasn't some powerful expert. What point would there be in inviting him? He would just be wasting a slot in the dungeon. Shi Feng entered a thought.
There were a lot of good items that dropped from a 20-man dungeon. It had been particularly true for the Dark Moon Graveyard, which dropped a lot of worthwhile equipment for swordsmen. The attributes of the equipment from that dungeon were also much better than the ones obtained from wild bosses. However, Shi Feng was not able to organize a 20-man party, so it wouldn't be a disadvantage to join Gentle Snow for a round.
Alright, but leave a few spots for me.
Also, all swordsman equipment and forging designs must belong to me, Shi Feng answered with a nod.
Can't you be a little more humble? Zhao Yueru looked at Shi Feng, pouting. She felt Shi Feng was going too overboard.
If Gentle Snow had asked anyone else, they would have readily agreed, even going as far as to forego getting any equipment.
Shi Feng, however, even wanted priority over equipment. He was not courteous with them at all.
Gentle Snow did not imagine Shi Feng was truly different from the other people.
He did not play around with his words.
However, it was interesting that he would say whatever he wanted.
Following which, Gentle Snow looked towards the party members behind Shi Feng. Although they were noobs, their equipment was all of good quality. They could barely manage in the 20-man dungeon.
Thus, Gentle Snow said, "Fine.
Let's add each other as friends then. We'll be in touch when the time comes, alright? You can just contact me a few hours before raiding the dungeon. I'll arrive on time." Shi Feng accepted Gentle Snow's friend request. Subsequently, Shi Feng and his party members left the small rock pit, heading towards Dark Moon Valley. When the group passed through the Deathly Forest's dungeon, Stabbing Heart of the Assassin's Alliance abruptly called out to Shi Feng. "Brother Yi Feng, I nearly failed to recognize you. I never imagined you actually knew a big shot like the Snow Goddess.
You must not forget a brother like me in the future," Stabbing Heart jokingly said as he walked towards Shi Feng.
"Nonsense. I just happened to meet with Miss Snow by chance," Shi Feng replied with a smile.
"Brother Yi Feng, you are too humble. Based on your strength, you are absolutely worthy of becoming friends with the Snow Goddess. After all, both of you are experts of the same level." Stabbing Heart thought Shi Feng was very humble. It was no wonder he was such a great expert.
The way he conducted himself was different than ordinary people.
Stabbing Heart wanted to befriend Shi Feng even more now. "Our Assassin's Alliance is preparing to enter the dungeon. I wonder if Brother Yi Feng would be interested in joining us?"
"Of course, you can pick any of the equipment that you want." "You are too courteous, Brother Stabbing Heart.
However, I still have some things to attend to.
I will definitely join if there is another chance in the future." Shi Feng politely rejected the offer. Stabbing Heart spoke in a loud voice.
Surrounding players clearly heard his words.
At first, everyone thought of Shi Feng as just a noob. His being called upon by the Snow Goddess was just due to luck. Even now, Stabbing Heart of the Assassin's Alliance wished to befriend Shi Feng.
Just what sort of situation was this? The Assassin's Alliance was a large guild that was famous throughout White River City. As the sub-leader of the guild's elite group, Stabbing Heart would not need to interact with normal players at all. However, he tried to befriend Shi Feng. Shi Feng had actually rejected him. Shi Feng was just too domineering. If someone were to call Shi Feng a noob, nobody would believe them.
There was something strange about the situation.
Everyone guessed that Shi Feng must be a hidden expert that normal players did not know of.
Otherwise, why would big shots try to meet Shi Feng one after the other?
Boss waving, that Stabbing Heart actually tried to befriend that noob. I'm not dreaming, right?
Wordless Summer Night was shocked. Was this Shi Feng really the noob they met before? Waving slowly but surely was currently upset in his heart.
Initially, his heart still held hope that Shi Feng was just a noob. Now, however, that hope was utterly destroyed by stabbing heart.
Shi Feng was not a noob. He was definitely an expert, just like Lonely Snow had said. Shi Feng might even be greater than Lonely Snow had described him to be. If Lonely Snow followed Shi Feng, then his future would certainly be filled with boundless prospects. On the other hand, they had chased Shi Feng away.
They had missed a great chance for them to befriend an expert. Boss, why don't we go over and apologize?
An expert is a magnanimous person. Who knows, he might even forgive us. At that time, we, too, could gain the favor of an expert, Battle to the End suggested. Wordless Summer Night nodded his head in complete agreement.
Just as Shi Feng's party was about to leave the deathly forest, waving slowly but surely and the others came running over. Big Brother Expert. We've had some misunderstandings before, so we're here to apologize to you.
We hope you can forgive our ignorance.
Here's a silver coin to show our sincerity.
We hope Big Brother Expert can take us under your wing. Waving slowly was all smiles as he apologized. The arrogance he had before was completely gone now. Wordless Summer Night and Battle to the End were also sincerely apologizing without stop. They wished to grind monsters with Shi Feng.
If you guys don't have anything else to say, then please leave.
I still have matters to attend to, so I don't have any time to waste with you. Shi Feng spun around to leave after replying. He did not mind one little bit in regards to waving slowly and the others' previous behavior.
However, wanting him to carry them?
Not a chance.
As for Lonely Snow, he only shook his head in regards to waving slowly and the others' actions.
If they had known that their actions would lead to such results today, maybe they wouldn't have acted so in the beginning. Watching Lonely Snow leave with Shi Feng, Wordless Summer curled his lips into a frown, saying in a sour tone, "Bah! What's there to be amazed about? In the future, I, too, will become an expert." However, only waving slowly knew Lonely Snow would become successful in the future. He was already in a different world than them. 1. Carry. A gaming term used to refer to a player who largely contributed to the team's victory. Chapter 36.
After leaving the deathly forest, Shi Feng's party rushed towards Dark Moon Valley without rest. At the current stage of the game, many players had already risen to level 2. Aside from raiding the dungeon at the Deathly Forest, they would stay in Brook Hills to kill level 2 cheetah cubs. Only a few experts would go to the level 4 area, Dark Moon Valley, to level up. However, along with the increase in player levels, it wouldn't be long before Dark Moon Valley would become occupied. After spending over half an hour returning to Dark Moon Valley, the scene they met with was the same as what Shi Feng expected. A few elite parties who were uninterested in the dungeon were currently killing level 4 kobolds that were wandering around the outer parts of the valley. These elite parties were quite skilled. They lured 2 or 3 monsters each time, with the shield warrior tanking in front and preventing the kobolds from closing in on their mage and healer. The healer was continuously healing from behind, barely maintaining the shield warrior's HP. Although it was taxing to grind in such a way, the gains from the fight were equally good. The 3 kobolds had dropped 2 coppers and some stone materials. In God's domain, only monsters level 3 and above would drop skill books and bronze equipment. Although the chance was only 10,000 to 1, it was still enough to cause players to go on wild goose chases. Currently, bronze equipment was very valuable. Even more so were skill books. With these enticements here, there would be many experts who would come forth, even if there was some danger involved. After taking a few glances, Shi Feng turned and left towards the inner parts of the Dark Moon Valley. The other party members who were new to the Dark Moon Valley were very nervous. It was especially true when they saw the level 4 monsters scattered throughout the entire area. Their breaths became slightly hurried. However, Blackie was extremely calm when he saw these level 4 kobolds. After all, he had previously killed hundreds of them.
He did not seem panicked, unlike the other party members. He simply followed Shi Feng, entering the deeper regions of the valley.
As for the elite parties, they could not help but be shocked when they saw Shi Feng's party enter deep into the valley. They had never imagined the newcomer party would have such courage. There were very few players currently present in Dark Moon Valley.
It had yet to be completely developed, so there were a lot of kobolds in the middle of the valley.
The deeper one headed towards the center, the greater the number of kobolds.
There would even be groups that consisted of 10 or more kobolds. Grinding monsters there was just too dangerous. The lowest number of kobolds they had to face was at least 4 or 5. It was not worth risking an unwarranted death. Unfortunately, these people did not know Shi Feng was more insane than they previously thought. Shi Feng did not just enter the deeper regions of the valley.
Instead, he went towards the core of the Dark Moon Valley.
There was a good location to grind monsters there.
Not only was there a large number of monsters, but their respawn rate was quick as well.
Most importantly, the drop rate there for ore was high. Regarding understanding, Shi Feng was like the local god of the area when it came to the Dark Moon Valley.
Be it the location of the monsters, the number of monsters available, or their respawn time, Shi Feng had spent countless hours researching in his previous life. His goal at that time was to increase the grinding speed of his party, all to improve his position within Shadow.
Life was truly fascinating.
Shi Feng's sacrifice towards Shadow in his previous life had currently turned around to help himself instead.
It could increase his own party's level more quickly, while at the same time guaranteeing him a steady supply of ore. Moving along the path of broken rocks, groups of 4 or 5 level 4 kobolds would occasionally appear.
However, it was just a small matter with the equipment of Shi Feng's party.
Looking at the party's guardian knight, Kola, be it with HP or defense, he could easily tank 4 kobolds at the same time.
The healer, Drowsy Sloth, could maintain Kola's HP above 80% without wasting much effort. If Kola had let a monster past, then Lonely Snow would go up and push it back.
As for the others, they would fervently deal damage.
A simple sword strike from Shi Feng could already deal over 100 damage, whereas Blackie's dark arrows could each deal 88 damage.
The fight could not get any easier than this. Within moments, the 5 kobolds were all dealt with.
Compared to the elite party outside, Shi Feng's party was stronger by several folds. Shi Feng simply picked up the stone materials and ore that dropped, then continuing deeper into the Dark Moon Valley. After spending over an hour moving forward, Shi Feng's party had finally arrived in front of a mountain.
The massive mountain was hundreds of meters in height.
Kobolds no longer filled the area surrounding the mountain. Wandering gnomes had replaced them. These wandering gnomes each held a small shovel in their hands, using it to dig into the rock wall of the mountain. There were also quite a few gnome overseers that inspected the surrounding areas with a whip in hand. "Brother Feng, the monsters here are just too numerous.
Are we really going to grind here?" Blackie's heart shook slightly when he took a look around. He discovered hundreds of wandering gnomes around the vast mountain. There was even a few level 5 gnome overseers. Compared to the groups of over 10 kobolds outside, this place was a literal battlefield. Kola also gulped down a mouthful of saliva, worriedly saying, "Party leader, I'm not trying to boast, but tanking 6 or 7 of them is my limit. I really can't manage this many monsters." It wasn't just Blackie or Kola. The others, as well, were apprehensive. Wandering gnomes occupied the entire mountain, and these gnomes were very close to each other. As long as they made a mistake while luring, then they would have to face off against hundreds of level 4 monsters. Such a large number of monsters was much scarier than the Lord rank felt. "I know you guys can't fend all of them off. However, who ever said about letting any of you tank hundreds of gnomes?" Shi Feng rolled his eyes at his party members. He was extremely clear regarding the party's standards.
Facing off against 10 gnomes at the same time was nearly their limit, so how could they deal with hundreds at the same time?
Even a level 10 player would be finished when met with hundreds if level 4 monsters.
However, wasn't there a good saying that stated, "If you can't outfight them, outrun them"?
Xi Feng's agility had reached 30 points. Including the bronze shoes he had, his movement speed had exceeded the wandering gnomes by at least 4 points. He could easily kite the gnomes and let Blackie use the AoE skill, Hell Flame.
The efficiency of grinding in such a way was several times greater than that of killing individually. Following which, Xi Feng told everyone about his plan. He needed Blackie to get the timing right, maximizing the effect of Hell Flame. As for the others, they were responsible for taking out the gnomes with low HP. When Xi Feng had chosen his position, he grabbed a handful of stones and rushed towards the nearby gnome overseer. Just as Xi Feng approached the 20-yard distance, the overseer had started yelling loudly. Its screams attracted the attention of many of the surrounding wandering gnomes.
Xi Feng waited first for a moment, avoiding the whip of the gnome overseer and allowing the wandering gnomes to continuously gather. When about 30 gnomes had gathered, Xi Feng turned around and ran in the opposite direction. Afterward, he threw a small stone that struck another gnome overseer. The overseer who was struck loudly bellowed, bringing along over 20 of its brethren and rushing at Xi Feng. Within moments, Xi Feng had lured over 60 monsters. However, Xi Feng was not yet satisfied. He started circling the mountain as he lured monsters, and within 5 minutes, there were hundreds of wandering gnomes and more than 10 gnome overseers chasing behind him with all their might. Unfortunately for them, Xi Feng's equipment was just too good. His speed was 30% greater when compared to the gnomes. Including Xi Feng's extraordinary techniques and control over his body, he was able to toy with the gnomes whichever way he wanted. "Blackie, get ready to cast," Xi Feng reminded. "All right."
Blackie was extremely excited. This was his first time using AoE magic, so he did not know what kind of effects it would have. Subsequently, Blackie's fingers started gesturing in mid-air. Brilliant magical seals started appearing, forming into a dazzling magic circle that gave off a peerless aura. As Blackie spat out the last syllable, the land shook. Jade-green flames rushed to the sky, devouring the entire gnome army. A field of damages over 100 had appeared. Within 5 seconds, every gnome chasing after Xi Feng received over 200 damage, their remaining HP less than half. However, the target of these gnomes had also changed. They no longer went after Xi Feng, but Blackie instead. Xi Feng abruptly stopped. He pulled out the abyssal blade and rushed forward. Thundering Flash. Not only did the level 4 Thundering Flash have a low cooldown, but its attack range also increased to 15 by 3 yards. It had nearly covered the entire gnome army. 3 streaks of thunder flew past the gnome army, creating 3 damages of over 120 points to every gnome. The attack had completely devoured the remaining HP of the gnomes. As for the low HP ones that remained, they were quickly held back by Cola. Lonely Snow then rushed forward and used a whirlwind slash, thoroughly ending the remaining gnomes. The hundreds of gnomes had been wiped out, leaving behind a floor covered with items. Meanwhile, everyone's experience madly rose. Express of over 10 points appeared one after the other, dazzling everyone's eyes. Wah! Blackie had risen to level 3. This is too awesome. Blackie roared in exhilaration. This is only the beginning. They will still respawn in a moment. Xi Feng laughed, let's quickly pick up the drops. Suddenly, everyone started busying themselves. Even with 6 people retrieving the drops, the loot of hundreds of gnomes still required them to spend a lot of time doing so. However, moments after they started collecting, a gnome that piloted a gigantic robot suddenly appeared. The gnome's face was crimson red. It immediately rushed towards Xi Feng's party with unparalleled rage. Not good. It's the hazard gnome.
Everyone spread out. Shi Feng shouted the moment he laid eyes on the gigantic robot. Chapter 37.
The moment everyone saw the giant robot piloted by a midget gnome, they instinctively knew he was something very dangerous. After hearing Shi Feng's reminder, they ignored the loot on the ground and immediately ran towards the forest without a shred of hesitation.
Naturally, Shi Feng would not stay behind either.
The hazard gnome was a very dangerous monster.
It was especially true when he first made his appearance.
He was even stronger than Werewolf felt with its Death Berserk activated.
Hazard Gnome, Special Elite. Level 5. HP 1600.
There was a very small chance for the hazard gnome to appear after clearing out the wandering gnomes and gnome overseers. However, his appearance also signified the start of a player's nightmare. There was a saying in God's domain that warns people not to look down on gnomes just because they were midgets.
If they were enraged, they could easily extinguish your life at any given moment. In his previous life, Shi Feng met the hazard gnome once before.
At that time, he was with an elite party who was grinding for ore. After killing the gnomes, the hazard gnome appeared. They did not imagine they would meet a special elite, so they had all excitedly rushed at him. However, the situation ended up in a tragedy for the 20-man party. The hazard gnome's 1600 HP must not be taken lightly. His defense was an abnormality, capable of reducing 80% of the damage he received.
A level 4 berserker using an axe could only take 2 HP from the gnome. On the other hand, the hazard gnome's attacks were even more powerful. Everyone would get a free trip back to the city after he fired a burst of bullets. Although Shi Feng's party had tried their best to run away, the hazard gnome's hatred for their evil deeds was clearly implacable. The rockets on the robot's back suddenly ignited. The steel machine that was over 3 meters tall rushed at high speed towards Shi Feng's party. While being chased, Blackie attacked with his dark arrow as he ran. Although the arrow had struck the hazard gnome, it had only caused a meager -4 damage. Blackie's eyes widened when he saw the damage. He said in a dumbstruck manner, "Disgusting. If the robot wasn't protecting this gnome, I could one-shot him anytime. Don't mind it for now and focus on running. Pay attention to dodging the bullets. As long as we are 1,200 yards away from the mountain, the hazard gnome will return." Shi Feng never thought, just after a lecture from him, Blackie's skill would improve to the degree of being able to hit his target while moving. However, fighting head-on with the hazard gnome would be very foolish. Blackie understood Shi Feng's intentions. He turned around and started chanting Evil Whip, binding the pursuing hazard gnome with 5 thorns and greatly reducing the gnome's speed. With this, everyone managed to gain quite a distance from the gnome. When the hazard gnome broke free from the 5 thorns, high damages of -23, -24, -23, -23, -24 suddenly appeared on his head. His HP had turned to 1479 within an instant. The damage caused by the evil whip was just ridiculous. Blackie was shocked. Before, his level 3 dark arrow had only dealt -4 damage. On the other hand, the evil whip had caused over 100 damage total. The difference between them was just too great. Did the hazard gnome have that kind of fetish? Shi Feng saw hope when the hazard gnome's HP suddenly fell by a portion. The hazard gnome did not have any immunity towards plant-based attacks. Shi Feng immediately commanded, "Everybody stop running. Cola, get the hazard gnome's hatred and let his back face toward the group. The others attack and mind your positions. As long as the hazard gnome lifts up his gun, immediately dodge the muzzle. Blackie, attack immediately after Evil Whip's CD finishes. We have a chance to get rid of him." Whether they would live or die before they ran out of the 1200-yard mark was an uncertainty. So, why not fight it out? Who knows, they might even be able to get rid of this hazard gnome. In Shi Feng's previous life, There were no players who killed the Hazard Gnome before. If they were to kill him now, something good might drop. Currently, the Hazard Gnome's hatred was targeted towards Blackie.
However, Lonely Snow was a step ahead of the gnome, using charge on him.
He used a whirlwind slash on the gnome, causing 3 points of damage. Although the damage was low, the momentary fainted state it caused gave Cola a chance to use Divine Strike, followed by Punishment. The two attacks caused -3, -2 damage, and the additional hatred they attracted had the Hazard Gnome locked onto Cola. The Hazard Gnome extended the electric saw on the robot's right arm, violently slashing at Cola. Cola blocked the attack with his shield. His body retreated 3 steps backward and a damage of -147 appearing above his head. Cola was shocked. When the next attack from the electric saw came, he hurriedly dodged and rolled to the side, avoiding the attack completely. Drowsy Sloth immediately healed Cola twice, returning close to 100 HP to Cola. Such fierce damage, Lonely Snow was shocked as well. He no longer dared to stay, turning around and running more than 10 yards away from the gnome. He would definitely die, even if he were only struck once by the electric saw. On the other hand, Shi Feng was not afraid of him. He immediately arrived at the Hazard Gnome's back, using out a series of skills: Thundering Flash, Double Chop, and Chop. The occasional critical hit would also cause -16 damage. Compared to the others, Shi Feng's damage was already very high. However, the Hazard Gnome only gave a look of contempt towards Shi Feng's attacks. He continued using his electric saw to attack Cola. A series of fierce attacks had forced Cola to constantly retreat backward. His HP was continuously falling as well. Behind, Drowsy Sloth's healing could not keep up with the damage Cola was receiving. He could only watch as Cola inched closer to death. At the most crucial moment, Shi Feng used Abyssal Bind. 9 pitch-black chains bound the Hazard Gnome, giving Cola a breather. Within the 3 seconds, the Hazard Gnome had only lost 7% of his HP after being barraged by everyone's attacks. The total damage the party dealt was not even the equivalent of a single evil whip from Blackie. When the 3 seconds had ended, the Hazard Gnome regained his freedom. The green-skinned gnome revealed a mocking smile on his face, his tiny hands moving around and manipulating buttons. The robot's arm holding the electric saw made a roundabout slash, creating a beautiful arc. Shi Feng's entire person was sent flying. He smashed into a tree and lost 286 HP. Cola rushed up in a hurry, his HP having recovered by more than half. He used Divine Strike and Punishment once again, trying to pull back the Hazard Gnome's hatred. However, the Hazard Gnome had actually ignored Cola. Instead, he lifted the gun in his left hand, aimed it and fired a burst of bullets at Shi Feng. A barrage of densely packed bullets flew towards Shi Feng. However, Shi Feng had yet to land after being sent flying, so it was impossible to dodge the bullets. Phantom Kill. Shi Feng's doppelganger instantly appeared before him. The doppelganger waved his blade, continuously blocking the bullets. Meanwhile, Shi Feng had already activated Gravity Liberation. He jumped up to a treetop, avoiding the attack range of the Hazard Gnome. However, his doppelganger had already been killed. After finishing a cartridge of bullets, the Hazard Gnome started changing magazines. Afterward, he continued to rush at Shi Feng. Everyone else could only continue attacking, shaving away the Hazard Gnome's HP bit by bit. However, Shi Feng was not easy to hit after he activated Gravity Liberation. Shi Feng also used the trees for protection. He was barely dodging the flying bullets as he continued kiting the gnome. As for Blackie, he would immediately use Evil Whip as soon as it was ready. The Hazard Gnome's HP continuously fell, 64%, 50%, 30%, 20%, 10%. When only 10% of the Hazard Gnome's HP remained, the gnome suddenly jumped out of the metallic machine. He wore a pair of rocket boots and started to escape. It can't be.
Monsters can actually escape?
Blackie watched as the hazard gnome ran, with extreme speed, to a location without people.
The others were also shocked. They never imagined the gnome would have such a high intelligence.
He ran the moment he knew he could not win the fight. We can't let him escape. We will have fought for nothing otherwise. Cola immediately chased after the gnome.
He had been bullied by the hazard gnome just a moment ago, so his heart was currently filled with anger. How could he let the hazard gnome escape after having taken advantage of them? You want to escape? Not a chance. Shi Feng chased after him with Windblade.
However, the hazard gnome was unperturbed. He sent Shi Feng a mocking expression before pressing a button on his waist. The rocket boots spewed out large amounts of flames, ready to fly away. 1. Within 3 seconds, the effective duration of Abyssal Bind. Chapter 38.
The hazard gnome's shameless rocket boots shocked everyone. They had never seen a monster that was so good at escaping before. Its human-like expressions and actions were completely different from NPCs. The hazard gnome was like a person pretending to be an NPC.
2 streaks of crimson flame flared, slowly lifting the hazard gnome into the air. Unwillingness filled everyone's hearts.
However, they could no longer stop it, but only watch the hazard gnome flee with their own eyes. The mages in the party were over 40 yards away from the hazard gnome.
Lonely Snow as well was over 30 yards apart from it. It was not within the range of charge.
Also, the feint effect of charge would become ineffective because the target was floating in mid-air.
Only the movement speed increase would take effect. Currently, only Shi Feng was close to the hazard gnome. He was only 15 yards away from it.
However, Shi Feng did not have any range attacks.
Even if he chased after it, the hazard gnome would raise over 20 yards from the ground by the time he arrived. In the end, Shi Feng would only watch the hazard gnome escape. 9 Dragon Slash. Shi Feng knew he could not catch up. He waved the abyssal blade, shrouded in black mist, in his hand. Within an instant, 9 streaks of black mist shot towards the hazard gnome. Shi Feng was not willing to allow such a smart hazard gnome leave. Initially, Shi Feng only thought of the hazard gnome as an average special elite. He had never imagined the gnome to be so much like a player. Throughout his 10 years of playing God's Domain, Shi Feng rarely saw such intelligent gnomes. The main god system wouldn't simply bestow a small monster with high intelligence. Such bestowals usually had a deeper meaning behind them. For example, those human heroes or legendary beings were all great characters. Their existences caused people to shudder. Although the intelligence of this hazard gnome did not reach the level of those heroes or legendary beings, he was still much smarter than a boss monster. There might even be unimaginable gains by killing it. Currently, the hazard gnome's displayed information changed. He suddenly became Arcus Maddox. Arcus Maddox, Lord rank. Level 5. HP 600/600. Shi Feng felt a sense of familiarity when he saw this name. It seems that he had heard of it before, yet he could not recall anything about it. However, the gnome only had 600 HP. Shi Feng was confident he could kill the gnome with the 9 Dragon Slash. Just when the 9 sword shadows were about to pierce Arcus Maddox, the gnome took out a few steel balls from his small bag. He threw the balls at the phantoms of the abyssal blade. Brilliant sparks flared up the moment the 2 attacks came into contact. Hong! 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 A series of explosions forced the phantoms of the abyssal blade back. Just when the phantoms were prepared to attack Arcus Maddox once more, he immediately flew over 30 yards away. Meanwhile, the 9 phantoms of the abyssal blade could only attack targets within 30 yards of its reach. Shi Feng could only watch helplessly as Arcus Maddox escaped. Crap! How could there be such a monster? His escaping ability is just a bug. 1. Blackie stared at the fleeing Arcus Maddox as he cursed. Kola was grinding his teeth in hatred as well, sending a few punches towards a nearby tree. The other party members felt displeasure also.
Everyone fought long and hard against this elite monster. However, just when they were about to reap the rewards of their efforts, their prize grew wings and flew away.
Was there anything more depressing?
Brother Feng, let's continue chasing it.
Blackie discovered that the gnome's movement speed was not fast. Also, there should be a limited amount of fuel powering that pair of boots. Who knows? The gnome might land just after a while. Forget it. Let's continue grinding gnomes. Shi Feng shook his head. If they could chase the gnome, Shi Feng would have long since chased after it.
However, the gnome's rocket boots were just too powerful. It was titled as one of God's domain's godly escape tools.
Currently, the boots had just been activated. Its speed would abruptly increase in a moment, and the gnome would disappear in the blink of an eye. It would be an impossible task if they wished to find the gnome.
As expected, the flames gushing out from the rocket boots greatly increased after a moment.
Shoo! Arcus Maddox disappeared from the air, unable to be seen anymore. Best not let us meet again. You can dream of escaping the next time.
Blackie said in an unfortunate tone as he looked towards the spot where Arcus Maddox had disappeared.
In his heart, Shi Feng felt that it was a pity to let the gnome go. However, it would no longer be dangerous when they grinded on wandering gnomes from now on.
After this experience, the hazard gnome most likely would not show himself ever again.
Let's go, continue grinding on the wandering gnomes. Shi Feng turned around and said to his party.
Brother Feng, you're still the best. How could I not think of it?
If we killed all of this bastard's kinsmen, we'll see if he doesn't show up again.
Blackie laughingly said.
Shi Feng was speechless. He turned around and left, no longer paying any attention to the fantasizing Blackie. Suddenly, Shi Feng stopped his feet in shock. Damn! Our luck really is too poor. I never thought that Arcus Maddox would actually appear here, and he was also a level 5 hazard gnome.
Shi Feng tightly clenched his fists, his brows wrinkled.
It was the first time he became so enraged. When everyone looked at Shi Feng's wrathful expression, they could faintly feel the surroundings become chilly. They could not help but retreat a step, their foreheads covered in a cold sweat. Before, they felt Shi Feng was a calm and easygoing person. Never would they have imagined Shi Feng would become so terrifying after becoming angry. The forest around them no longer seemed lively but more like a frozen hell, silent, cold, and dark. Brother Feng, are you all right? Blackie carefully asked. He was shocked. Shi Feng was completely different from when he was mad or arguing with others. It was the first time Blackie saw Shi Feng enraged to such a degree. Oh, it's nothing. Shi Feng reacted, replying with a smile. He stored back the dense killing intent into his heart. Such killing intent was slowly honed throughout the years Shi Feng had played God's domain. Compared to the tyrant bear Kola of 10 years in the future, there was nothing special about Shi Feng's killing intent. However, at present, it was considered unbearable for Blackie and the others. Shi Feng finally recalled the name of Arcus Maddox. Arcus Maddox was a famous Grandmaster engineer within God's domain. 3 years after Arcus Maddox shocked the nation by creating the Sky Fortress, Twin Snake Ring, he had gone on to establish the Gnome Empire. With it, the new update, Emergence of the New World, also activated. At that time, countless super guilds started expeditions towards the fortress, Twin Snake Ring. However, all of them were annihilated, and Arcus Maddox was the cause of such a result. On the other hand, Shi Feng was completely unaware of a great character had appeared right before his eyes. He also lost the chance to kill Arcus Maddox, so how could Shi Feng not be enraged? Party leader, there's a box here. Did it drop from Arcus Maddox during the explosions? Gluttonous Mouse, who had been silent all this while, asked as he picked up a small metallic box from the grass. Shi Feng received the box and took a look at it. He discovered the words Arcus Maddox carved onto the metallic box.
Shortly after Shi Feng opened the box, he said suddenly with a laugh, "Great!
Good job, Mouse! With this, we didn't fight for nothing after all."
When the group saw Shi Feng in a happy mood, they knew the item must be very precious, as common items were nothing in Shi Feng's eyes. As to wanting the item for themselves, none of them ever had such thoughts. They had long since made Shi Feng their idol, and being able to aid their idol naturally made them happy. "Let's do it this way.
You guys stay here to grind and level up.
I still have something that needs to be done. Notify me when you have all reached level 4.
Shi Feng kept the metallic box and hastily made the arrangements. Nobody could help him with the following matter. Only Shi Feng was able to proceed. Everyone felt reluctant when they heard Shi Feng's command.
However, hearing Shi Feng have plans for them after they reached level 4, their anticipation grew as they abided Shi Feng's arrangements.
Subsequently, Shi Feng left the deeper regions of the Dark Moon Valley.
The party had Blackie's AoE skill. Killing 7 or 8 gnomes at a time was no problem at all, and their leveling speed was at least 2 or 3 times faster than the other parties.
On the other hand, what Shi Feng needed to do was to utilize this metallic box, and to forward the first step of his plans in God's domain. 1.
Bug. A fault in the game that causes unexpected results when an action is carried out within the game.
Chapter 39. After leaving the Dark Moon Valley, Shi Feng rushed towards Scarlet Lake. He had also activated gravity liberation to save more time.
The players on their way to the Dark Moon Valley saw Shi Feng speeding past them like a gale of wind. His speed was shockingly fast, and his figure was just a blur. Who is that person?
Which assassin is he?
His speed is so fast.
No, look at his waist.
That's a sword hanging there, not a dagger.
He should be a swordsman. Crap. Are the current swordsmen that op? The widely spread rumor on the forums stated that a mysterious swordsman killed the mayor of Red Leaf Town. There was also a powerful swordsman at the Deathly Forest that received an invitation from the Snow Goddess. I would have played as a swordsman if I had known about this earlier.
Say, do you think they're the same person?
Definitely not. I saw the swordsman that killed the mayor.
That male swordsman was as big as a black bear.
His arms alone were thicker than our thighs.
He had forcefully killed that level 15 mayor. The players passing by started a discussion as they watched Shi Feng depart.
They were inwardly speechless towards the swordsman job.
They should have played as swordsmen if there was such a powerful job. However, it was too late now. Shi Feng might have laughed it off if he had known their thoughts. There was no strongest job in God's domain, only the strongest player.
Shi Feng ran for over 2 hours through the vast plains.
He activated gravity liberation over tens of times, escaping the pursuit of high-leveled monsters. He passed through the level 6 map, Wolfman's Ruins, and the level 8 map, Oro Fort, before arriving in the level 10 area, Scarlet Lake. Scarlet Lake was the playground of level 10 water elementals and little fishmen. Watching from a high location, Shi Feng could see groups of little fishmen patrolling. The closer it was to the Scarlet Lake, the more there were of little fishmen. The central region of the Scarlet Lake was the nest of the little fishmen, whereas annoying water elementals filled the water of the lake. Due to the densely packed and large number of monsters in the Scarlet Lake, the little fishmen's curse skill was extremely horrendous. It could absorb a player's attributes and turned it into their own. The longer they fought, the stronger they would become. They were extremely hard to kill. Including the fact that there were no quests here, there were rarely any players who would willingly come here to level up. However, Shi Feng had to enter into the deeper regions of the Scarlet Lake. The metal box dropped by Arcus Maddox was extremely precious. If Arcus Maddox were to know it fell into Shi Feng's hands, he would most likely bleed out in rage. There was a treasure map inside the box, and the treasure it hid was located at Scarlet Lake.
Shi Feng had played God's Domain for over 10 years now. He had done extensive research regarding the history of God's Domain.
He truly did not think Arcus Maddox would have this treasure map. It was the record of a heaven-shaking secret. 900 years ago, alchemy master Molotov had created an item with all his effort.
Wars were waged between the large countries in God's Domain for this item. There were over 10 heroic figures that fought over it.
However, this item became lost in the end, its whereabouts unknown. It had become an unsolved mystery in God's Domain. Meanwhile, the treasure map in Shi Feng's hands, by chance, recorded the location of this item. This item was the Philosopher's Stone. It was a sacred item for alchemy. If alchemists could obtain the Philosopher's Stone, then they would have the ability to transform stone into gold, amassing immense wealth. They would even be able to revive the dead, breaking the alchemy law of equivalent exchange. Who would have thought such a sacred item would be placed in such an unremarkable location as Scarlet Lake? However, the Scarlet Lake was still a dangerous place for Shi Feng. After all was said, there was still a gap of 8 levels between Shi Feng and the monsters here. With the suppression due to levels, Shi Feng was not an opponent for the level 10 monsters, not to mention the attribute-stealing little fishmen. However, Shi Feng could not help but take the risk. The earlier he obtained the Philosopher's Stone, the earlier his heart could be at ease. If he waited until he was level 7 or 8, someone else might claim the item. He wouldn't even be able to feel regret when that time came. Shi Feng took out the metal box from his bag, carefully taking out the treasure map within it. He started researching it in detail. The marking on the treasure map was very clear. The treasure was located directly below the little fishman's nest. However, how would Shi Feng be able to circle around all these little fishmen? The problem with the water elementals also needed to be solved. Although water elementals had low HP, they had a 60% immunity to physical attacks. They also had a movement speed reduction skill, so they were a headache for melee players. After observing for half an hour, Shi Feng discovered that the little fishmen were not always on patrol. They would eventually take a break. Also, these little fishmen were only active by the lake's shores. They hardly ever entered the water, because once they entered it, their movement speed would sharply reduce by 60%. Shi Feng could use this short rest period to rush into the lake, and once he was in it, the little fishmen would not be able to chase after him. As for the water elementals under the water, Shi Feng could use the doppelganger of Phantom Kill to lure them away. Then, he could swim to the cavern below the little fishman's nest. If Shi Feng did not operate through his plan properly, he would definitely die. If he died, his losses would not be minor. It was not the experience loss that was a problem, however. With his advantage as a reincarnated person, Shi Feng could quickly recuperate the experience he lost. Only, he would be sent back to the town after dying once, and the time he would waste by returning here was just too much. 10 more seconds. Shi Feng watched the patrolling little fishmen, his heart estimating the time for him to sprint out. Time passed second after second. A group of patrolling fishmen watched their surroundings. After discovering nothing out of the ordinary, they entered a small wooden hut by the lake to rest, emptying the land by the lake. With all his might, Shi Feng dashed towards the shore. When Shi Feng was about 30 yards away from the lake, another group of patrolling fishmen discovered Shi Feng. They immediately sounded out an alarm, their hands wielding short swords as they rushed toward Shi Feng. When faced with 4 level 10 little fishmen, as powerful as Shi Feng was, he was not their match. Shi Feng's only hope was to jump into the water. However, the little fishmen were very quick, taking only a short moment to catch up to Shi Feng. They waved their short swords, slashing them at Shi Feng's back. Shi Feng knew he could not outrun the fishmen. He turned around and used Abyssal Bind on one of them, then continued by using Parry to block another one of his attackers. As a result, Shi Feng stopped the other little fishmen from moving forward. Using the power behind the fishman's attack, Shi Feng managed to pull away a distance of over 3 yards.
He activated gravity liberation and then jumped onto the lake.
However, the other little fishmen were quick to catch up, jumping into the lake after Shi Feng as well.
Plop! 4 little fishmen fell into the water. Shi Feng, however, was madly running above the lake's surface. Walking on water was a skill that could only be activated after agility reached 80 points.
However, Shi Feng had the ring of gravity. As a result, his body had reached a state of near weightlessness after activating gravity liberation.
Including his agility that was over 30 points, he, too, could move on the water surface. His speed would not be reduced by the water. In a few moments, Shi Feng had shaken off the unyielding little fishmen. He ran to a location not far from the little fishman's nest, diving into the water.
Just after entering the water, Shi Feng discovered a cavern that was surrounded by a lot of water elementals.
The water elementals were encircling around the cavern as if they were protecting something. Water elemental, common monster. Level 10. HP 750-750.
Shi Feng used phantom kill. His doppelganger swam over, luring the water elementals. Just as Shi Feng planned, a group of water elementals had discovered the doppelganger. One after another, they chased after the doppelganger.
Meanwhile, the doppelganger swam upwards. Although the water elementals had high movement speed underwater, it was an entirely different story when they were above ground.
They were the opposite of the little fishmen, becoming extremely slow once they reached the shore. With the water elementals lured away by his doppelganger, Shi Feng took the chance to quickly swim towards the cavern. Before Shi Feng even reached the cavern, the system notified him of the death of his doppelganger. The doppelganger had only earned Shi Feng over 20 seconds. After killing the doppelganger, the water elementals discovered an intruder near the cavern.
They all hurriedly swam back to the cavern entrance.
After discovering Shi Feng, the speed of these water elementals increased by a fold as they sped towards Shi Feng.
Chapter 40. Above the scarlet-colored lake, the speeding water elementals created waves of water that struck at the little fishman's nest. Waves that were as tall as a person enveloped the entire nest, destroying many of the small wooden huts on it. The hundreds of little fishmen inside the nest entered a frenzy.
They screamed and bellowed, each of them holding weapons as they jumped into the water and swam towards the cavern below the nest.
Dual-layered protection? Shi Feng took a look behind him, shocked.
As if hundreds of water elementals were not enough, now there were also hundreds of little fishmen following behind.
With this amount, even 2 or 3 elite groups of players would not amount to anything. Shi Feng had no choice but to increase his speed and rush into the cave. There was still a thread of hope for survival.
However, Shi Feng's speed underwater was very slow. It was incomparable to the druids who had their seal transformation, where their movement speed was increased by 50% when moving underwater. Instead, Shi Feng's movement speed was reduced by 50%. Soon, Shi Feng was just 50 yards away from the cavern's entrance. However, the enraged water elementals approached Shi Feng as if they were flying, their distance between Shi Feng shortening quickly.
42 yards. 28 yards. 20 yards. 10 yards.
Just when Shi Feng was only 5 yards away from the cavern entrance, the water elementals had caught up with Shi Feng. They waved their gigantic icy fists towards Shi Feng's head.
The attacks from water elementals carried a freezing effect that reduced movement speed.
As long as they hit Shi Feng, the water elementals would cling to him till death.
Shi Feng hurriedly spun around and used parry, blocking the fist of the first water elemental. Using the water elemental's immense strength, Shi Feng's body retreated backward by quite a distance. However, the remaining water elementals also rushed at him. "It seems I'll be going back to town."
Shi Feng looked at the hundreds of water elementals in front of him, feeling powerless. Just when Shi Feng was about to give up, he had floated into the cavern.
Inside, he saw a human-shaped ghost roaming about. It was roughly 30 yards away from Shi Feng. Shi Feng gave caution to the wind.
If he had to die, then he would die trying.
At the very least, he could obtain a little more information for future preparations.
Hence, Shi Feng used Windblade, his speed increasing by a large leap.
Like a gale, Shi Feng swept through the water and rushed to the shore of the cavern, escaping the clutches of the water elementals just in the nick of time. The moment the water elementals left the water, their speed was sharply reduced.
They could not catch up to Shi Feng's mad dash at all.
After leaving the water, Shi Feng quickly rushed towards the human-shaped ghost. The moment the abyssal blade was about to slash across the ghost's neck, Shi Feng suddenly discovered the half-transparent ghost did not actively attack him. Shi Feng abruptly turned the tip of his sword away, the blade sliding past the ghost's side. It did not attract the ghost's hatred. Close one, Shi Feng felt cold sweat down his back when he looked at the ghost's information. Brave 1, Floyd. High Lord. Level 25. HP 360,360,000.
If Shi Feng had attacked this brave one and attracted his hatred, even if he had 100 lives, he would still end up dead.
Within God's domain, brave ones were only second to heroes regarding strength.
Their position within a kingdom was even higher than that of a marquis and was second only to a duke.
Even if such a great character had died and turned into a ghost, he was still a monster of the great lord rank. He was a tyrant amongst monsters.
Without 100-men group of elite players, it was impossible to kill off this ghost.
Could he be the guardian of this place? Shi Feng looked at the brave one, Floyd, silently guessing in his heart. There were usually guards posted around places with treasure.
As for the little fishmen and water elementals outside, they could be considered, at most, as guard dogs.
They were unfit to guard an important treasure.
Shi Feng did not dare to stay any longer.
After all, there was still a large group of monsters chasing after him. He hurriedly ran towards the inner regions of the cavern. The cavern was very large.
There was a flight of stairs that led straight into the depths of the cavern, and following it down ought to lead Shi Feng to the Philosopher's Stone.
When Shi Feng was right before the stairs, a sea of water elementals and little fishmen had rushed at him. It was as if they had an undying grudge against him.
You lower lifeforms dare to sully this divine place? Prepare to receive divine punishment.
Floyd's gaze suddenly erupted in rage, pulling out a dark golden greatsword from his back. The sword gave out a surge of evil that made it seem as if it were the master of the world. When Floyd raised the greatsword, the surrounding air started becoming heavy. Following which, Floyd gave out a loud bellow as his arms swung the greatsword with all their might. A strong wind, followed by a sword flash, swept through all the water elementals and little fishmen. Each and every one of the monsters turned into ash, and the cavern's entrance instantly transformed into a pile of rubble. Strong! Shi Feng exclaimed in shock. He had sorely underestimated the strength of a brave one. Floyd's single sword could easily wipe out a 100-men group of level 30 elite players.
A 300-men group might be needed to even have a fighting chance. It was unexpected that the water elementals and little fishmen did not even have the right to become guard dogs.
They were all annihilated in an instant.
Shi Feng wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead.
Luckily, he was a human and not a lower life form. Otherwise, his outcome would be similar to those water elementals and little fishmen. This place is truly vicious. I guess I can only go downward now.
Shi Feng looked at the collapsed entrance.
Not even an earthworm could find a way through the debris. The stairs that led down were spiral-shaped.
The rocky walls surrounding it were also enchanted with a kind of light-based magic, brightening the entire stairwell. However, this stairwell was extremely long.
Fortunately, there were no dangers here.
After walking for an entire half an hour, Shi Feng finally arrived at the end of the stairwell, at the beginning of a wide and spacious hall. The hall was about the size of an entire football field, and it looked similar to a shrine of sorts. Made out of gold and jade, the two sides of the hall were carved with an abundance of illustrations and texts. There was also an altar at the deepest part of the shrine. Above the altar was a treasure chest made of pure gold. On each side of the treasure chest, there were two statues made of gold, both of them holding a greatsword in their hands.
System. Player has discovered the Sun Temple.
Sun Temple?
It was the first time Shi Feng had heard this name. In his previous life, there was no information on the Sun Temple. It might have been because no player had activated it before, so there was no information about it on the official website.
However, looking at the situation, it should be very dangerous. However, Shi Feng couldn't care less about it as he walked towards the golden altar. His target was the Philosopher's Stone, and the golden chest before his eyes should be holding the item. The moment Shi Feng stepped onto the altar, he clearly felt a chill permeating his body. The chilliness came from the two gigantic golden statues. Shi Feng did not know what sort of consequences there would be if he continued onwards to retrieve the Philosopher's Stone. However, he no longer had any choice. The cavern's entrance had already been sealed off, so he could only decide after grabbing the Philosopher's Stone.
Shi Feng slowly opened the golden treasure chest. Golden rays of light leaked out from the chest, illuminating the entire temple. Subsequently, the golden rays started to fade, revealing 3 items inside the chest.
Shi Feng pocketed the items with zero hesitation.
Crap! How could the Philosopher's Stone end up in such a state? Shi Feng looked at the thumb-sized blood-red stone, feeling extremely disappointed. Philosopher's Stone, damaged. Epic rank special item, dropped after death.
A sacred item for alchemy, the Philosopher's Stone can be used to turn stone into gold, revive the dead, and has many more unfathomable uses. However, the Philosopher's Stone was damaged and broken into 5 pieces by the Sword Emperor, Knight.
Nevertheless, the Philosopher's Stone possesses immense strength.
As long as the 5 pieces are gathered, it will be able to recover all of its strength. Active effect. Due to being damaged, the Philosopher's Stone possesses less than 1/10 of its original strength.
It is only possible to use it for alchemy conversion and elemental refinement. Although the effects were greatly reduced, Shi Feng was still satisfied with it.
These 2 abilities would enable Shi Feng to accomplish a lot. As for the remaining 2 items, one of them was the Golden Greatsword, a level 10 fine gold weapon.
The other item was an instantaneous movement magic scroll.
A great treasure indeed. Shi Feng looked at the Golden Greatsword in his hands with extreme excitement. Aside from magic weapons, it was the best item a level 10 player could have. If a level 10 player were to equip this greatsword, they could definitely become invincible amongst players of the same level. At this moment the 2 statues by the side shook. Their eyes released a red glow, locking their sights on Shi Feng. Shi Feng used the instantaneous movement magic scroll without hesitation. Golden-colored magical seals suddenly wrapped around Shi Feng. The spell on the magic scroll had a cast time of 3 seconds, and it was capable of sending the player to a selected location. This magic scroll was extremely precious. Although there were only a few copies of it in the entire God's domain, dying in this place was a much greater loss to Shi Feng. Just as Shi Feng was about to be slashed by the golden statues, he vanished from the temple.